Good evening. How are we all doing? Good. Good evening out there in television world. Today's the third in our basically lost session that I'm doing with you, and then there's going to be another short session just to review things and get you last minute prepared in May. It's May 6th, that's a Thursday night, and the actual penance service for you is May 11th. I just want to make a few things kind of clear about the sacrament of penance in good family practice. I'll start with that. Let me get my phone out of my man purse. The sacrament of penance is the one sacrament that over the years has been avoided by a whole lot of people. It was initially, as we talked about, something reserved for just a few sins, and it was the second chance and the only chance that people had to change their lives. The sacrament of penance then becomes tariff penance, where we were given things to do to make up for our sins, and they were related to what we did, and it was kind of an atonement, taking on a punishment, trying to change our lives in a specific way. Okay? And that worked for a while, but it stopped working because it was too hard at times for some people, and they just didn't get it. And so by the beginning of the 12th century, in 1215, at the Fourth Lateran Council, the Church created what we call the laws of the commandments of the Church. There's 6 of those. And it's to go to Mass on Sundays and days appointed. That's the first one. The second one is to fast and abstain on specific days, like days in Lent, for all of Lent at one time, some extra days during the course of the year. And nowadays, it's Fridays of Lent and Ash Wednesday and Good Friday as days that are appointed. The third one was to receive communion at least once a year. Why do you think we had to make a law to say you have to receive communion at least once a year? Give me the answer. Doesn't take much thought. Huh? Approve reception of communion. Yeah. So, yeah, people weren't going to communion. They weren't going to communion because of the long lines that were there and a feeling of unworthiness. Put the two together. By the 1200s, we had already taken away the chalice from people, so people were not receiving the blood of Christ under the species of wine, and they were only receiving the bread. But if you went to a cathedral where you had a couple of thousand people at a given Mass, and there were 3 people giving out communion, how many of you would hang around for an hour to wait to receive communion? And people just not receiving. And it's because it took too long. We had no Eucharistic ministers. We had no deacons. At some of the Masses in a big cathedral, you'd have a bishop and maybe about 5 priests. So 6 people giving out communion to 2,000 people. Yeah, people complain at times that it takes 10 minutes here. It would take an hour and a half in a big place. If I was the normal parish priest, I would be the only one giving out communion at my Mass. So imagine what that would be like. Take away all the other priests, take away all the deacons, take away all the Eucharistic ministers. We have 1,000 people here in church, and there's me. What happens? It's like, you go this week, and you go next week, and you go the week after, and you find some time too. And so that whole idea of going to communion once a year, and we said, well, do it during Lent and during Easter time. And it became known as your Easter duties. And so it was the responsibility of all of us to go to communion at least once a year. And then we looked, and they made the next rule. You must go to confession once a year if you're in the state of serious sin. Why? Same answer. People weren't going. Okay? And so it became, again, the rule, start going. And we also made it easier. We said, you don't have to take a penance, do the penance, fulfill it, come back, and then get forgiveness. What you do is you confess your sins to a priest. You say, I am sorry, an act of contrition, or I'm sorry in your own words, and you accept a simple penance that can be done at any time. But once you accept the penance, not once you finish the penance, then I give, or the priest gives, or the bishop gives absolution. So we took confession, changed it around, and the whole idea now is you will be forgiven in confession as long as you are sorry for your sins. And my only responsibility was to hear what you said, both in terms of the things you did and the fact that you're sorry for having done those things. And that was the way it was for 700 years. And then finally, in the last century, we changed it again. And we basically said, it's not good enough to say, I'm sorry for what I did. It's, I'm going to do better. I'm not just sorry for my sins, but I promise to do better. I promise to change. I promise to grow. I promise with the help of the sacrament to do better things. And so we began to look at the sacrament in a different way. And now that's the sacrament we're trying to celebrate with you and your children, okay? With the sense that we all need to do that more than once every 10 years or 20 years or 30 years. Yeah. People have avoided the sacrament like crazy because at times we don't appreciate what it has to offer us. We don't want to admit the junk that we've done. We also have this way of not really wanting help in our lives. Except, how many helping groups have you joined? Anybody here joined at least one helping group to change your life? Okay. Now, some people join things like Alcoholics Anonymous or Weight Watchers or Overeaters Anonymous or Jenny Craig, or take your pick of all of the different keto diets and everything else that are there. How many of you have a gym membership, whether you use it or not? Okay. And you're paying for it just in case you want to go back someday. Okay. That's me. I still have my gym membership, and it's still very cheap. And occasionally I will do LA Fitness. But it's last 3 months, it's been no occasionally, because I haven't had the time, and I'm not going to run on a treadmill with my arm in a sling. But those are the kinds of things that we're supposed to do. Well, the sacrament of penance is that same kind of thing. We all joined the Catholic Church. We've all been, how many of you been trying to do something for Lent? Okay? Another helping practice. We join groups that pray together, that read the Bible together, that study stuff together. Another helping group to help us to change. And so we admit, usually, that it's a lot easier if we do stuff with other people and we have some encouragement and some support and some care, in doing things that make our lives better. And so That's a part. So that's the first four. The fifth one is to get married in church if you're Catholic, or in an appropriate way, to have only one marriage at a time, and to follow all the crazy rules that you can't kidnap somebody. Medieval times where you would grab a prince and you make him marry a princess to end a war, and they were done by proxies at the age of 7. So the church put in all these rules about you got to be at least 12 if you're a girl, 14 if you're a boy. Now it's gone up a little bit higher. You can't have shotgun weddings. You can't be forced into marriage. You can't marry your brother or sister. You can't marry your parents, your aunts, your uncles. You can't marry your godchildren. I can't marry, if I left the priesthood, I could not marry anybody I baptized. That's a good one. So, because I have a relationship to them in a different way. So you can't have two relationships. Yeah. You can't marry somebody who was adopted. So they're your adopted brothers and sisters. If you're living in the same family, you can't marry somebody who you've been living with as a teenager, no matter what the circumstances are. You can't marry if you're a priest, or if you're a deacon, or if you took vows in religious community. So I get 3 strikes, so I'm stuck. Or any other kind of promises like that you've made, unless you're released from them. You can't marry somebody if you're already married. You have to get married in the church, unless you get permission to do it someplace else. The church has to record your marriage. You have to be prepared for marriage. All those things together, and those are the laws of marriage, and they've been changing and developing since the 1200s, when it was first said, you must obey the laws. And they were all written for kings and queens and royal people at first, and then secondarily for the fact that in societies where everybody lived on farms or on fiefdoms, or sometimes with the growth of cities later on, and cities as we know them didn't really grow to be cities until the 13th, 1400s. And so people could just simply marry somebody, and if they wanted to dump my wife, or if you wanted to dump your husband, you just leave your farm and you go 30 miles down the road and you find some other place to live where nobody knows you, and you get married again. And so we started to record marriages. And so since the 1200s, the church has been recording marriages for the sake of women and children. So that there was no government regulations of marriage, not until the 17th and 18th centuries. Again, unless they're members of the royal family, then they had rules. And so we set up those rules so that people could just have justice. And in an age where, until the 1900s in many places, and even our own country, to the 20th century, where women couldn't vote, where women couldn't sue, where women couldn't own any property, where women had only rights based upon what their family or what they inherited or what their husband gave to them. We tried to change that whole thing so that the rights of women and the rights of children would be respected. And so we started this whole system that every one of us who's been baptized has a permanent record. You know how they talk about the permanent record you have in school and what's on it and all the bad stuff? Well, this is the good stuff that we record. And so if you want to know your date of marriage, the easiest place to do it is not to remember when you took, what day you were married or where you were. Remember where you were baptized. Ask for a new baptismal certificate. And on your baptismal certificate, it will say First Communion. It will say confirmation. It will say that you were married. It will say for me that I took my vows 50 years ago, this year, that I was ordained a deacon. 3 years after that I was ordained a priest. 4 years after that, in 1980, has the date, has the place, has who's done it. It's all in my baptismal certificate. And if you ever wanted, when you wanted to get married in the church, you had to ask for a new baptismal certificate so we can check up that you haven't been married 17 times before, that it's there. Or if you got married outside of the church, and some people do that, and we can validate those marriages, we have to look and make sure that you were never married in the church in the first place. And that wipes out a previous marriage that was done illicitly outside of the church rules. If you're married on a beach, without the permission of the church by a minister, as Catholics, that's invalid. Two Protestants, they can get married wherever they would like to. Diving out of airplanes, as long as there's a minister with them and two witnesses, then you're fine. Or a beach, or a backyard, or any place you want. And in fact, if they're both baptized people as Protestants, it's also a sacrament, which is kind of interesting. If it's between a Catholic and a Protestant and it happens on the beach or diving out of an airplane, it's invalid. And so it's not valid and it's not a sacrament. And because there are a whole bunch of people in this world, billions of them, who are not Christian or Catholic, then if they get married in an appropriate way and they were free to get married, then that's a valid marriage. So to Muslims, to Buddhists, to atheists, to tree worshipers, to dog lovers, to whatever religion people belong to or don't, if they get married and they're not baptized, their marriage is valid. And so we respect all marriages from that time as well. So that's the fifth commandment. Sixth commandment, people are starting to do this one back again, supporting your church. And that's supporting your church financially, supporting your church by being involved, supporting your church by getting into ministry, supporting your church by coming to events and prayers and all of the things that happen in church, coming to religious education and all those things. So those are the six basic commandments of the church. They happened in the Lateran Council. The Lateran Council was held in Rome. St. Peter's was not built yet. What was built was the Lateran Palace, and that's the Pope's cathedral. It's in the middle, it's St. John Lateran, beautiful Romanesque cathedral, and the Pope celebrates there about 4 times a year, including Holy Thursday. He will celebrate there. Other things he'll celebrate at St. Peter's, inside or outside, much bigger, and that's the reason why he does that. St. Peter's is a basilica. St. John Lateran is a cathedral. And again, before everybody moved in 1500 to the Vatican, everybody, the popes before that, lived at the Lateran Palace. And there have been 6 Lateran councils, and the most important one of them, for our purposes, is actually the 4th one. That's where they just tried to get everything, the basic rules, just saying, okay, if you're Catholic, you do these 6 things. You also do the 10 Commandments as a human being, but as a Catholic, you do these extra 6. So the 2 that affect you and your children these years is communion, at least once a year. Well, 3 of them. Communion once a year. Sacrament of Penance once a year. Oh, and by the way, to come to Mass, the Eucharist, on days appointed, which is every Sunday during the year, and holy days. So you get about 60 times where you're really called to go to Mass. Just celebrated the Mass of the Annunciation. That's a holy day in about half the countries of this world. It's not here in the United States. Last week we celebrated St. Joseph. That's a holy day in most of Europe. It's also a day off. So they celebrate that one well. And they don't want to get rid of any of those holy days because then the government's going to make them work. So those are the extra free holy days you get. The Ascension, Corpus Christi, St. Joseph, St. Peter and Paul in June, Christmas, of course, and January 1st. And for us, December 8th. Yeah. Some things are holy days just for the United States, like December 8th. Some things are holy days in a bigger way for everybody, Christmas. And some of the others are the pick and choose ones. And what the church allows us to do is there are 10 days that are worthy of being holy days. Christmas is the one that must be on the list. You can then pick as few as you want. You have to have one merry one. And then you can pick the ones that fit into your country's schedule or that are traditional. So the Epiphany, for example, is a holy day in Mexico and many southern places, South American places, because that's the day you exchange gifts. It's a little Christmas. The same with Canada. It's a holy day in Canada, but it's not here. And because it's not a holy day here, we just move it to Sunday. And we move the Ascension to Sunday. And we move Corpus Christi to Sunday. And we don't even move St. Peter and Paul. That's just there. We don't move St. Joseph. That's just there. But you can pick those as the holy days for your country. And it's the bishops of the country who pick from that list. There are as many as 8 other ones besides that Mary one and Christmas. Okay. Now, let's focus in on the sacrament of penance. Okay. When the church, after the Second Vatican Council, looked at the sacrament, it looked and said, okay, how do we do this? Yeah. And they noticed that at times, confession was purely private. At other times, it was a communal celebration. Since the 6th century, when we had canonical penance and people went to the sacrament because they had killed somebody or committed adultery or did one of the capital crimes, idolatry, one of the capital crimes of the Roman Empire. And everybody knew about that for the most part. You know, better than having newspapers, they had the rumor gossips. Do you know what he did? You know, and once people found out you're a murderer, you're cheating on your wife or your husband, you worshipped idols during times of persecution, you robbed too many banks, or you rebelled against society, they would call you to the sacrament of penance because they felt it was their responsibility to help you to become better. And then once that sense was lost, then it became, everything was private, individual. So you could go to confession to a priest or to somebody who had a penitential, the book of the punishments due to sin that were offered. Then it became in the 12th century going to confession to a priest or a bishop. And then since then, the same kind of thing. Before that, and all the time during that, the penitential rite at Mass was always seen as forgiving sins. Yeah. And the sacrament of extreme unction, the lost rites, whatever you want to call it, the sacrament of the sick, also forgave sins. And it's interesting that the church believes that so much that only a priest can offer that sacrament. Yeah. A deacon cannot offer that. Deacons might work in hospitals as chaplains. They cannot offer that sacrament because only priests can forgive sins sacramentally. Obviously, God forgives the sins. We do God's work. But so I just heard I visited the hospital this afternoon, spent a couple hours visiting. Somebody's going to have his leg amputated on Friday. And I gave him the sacrament of the sick. The first thing I did was I forgave his sins. The next thing I did was anointed him. And the anointing is this holy anointing. May the Lord, his love and mercy, help you with the Holy Spirit. May the Lord who frees you from sin save you and raise you up. Forgiving sins in the middle of that. Giving an apostolic indulgence, plenary indulgence, if you're dying or you're facing death, that a priest doing the sacrament of the sick has the opportunity in the name of the Pope to grant to someone an indulgence that wipes out all of the temporal punishments due to sins, all those things that you got when you had a punishment confession, the terror confession. And then you give them communion. So you get all of that all in once. Yeah. So what we're looking at is as the church revises the sacraments to find a better way, we're also in a society that now knows about psychology, about sociology, about the way in which the human person does things. In the years before we knew any of that stuff, all we knew was you chose wrong because you were tempted by the devil to do wrong, and you need to be either forgiven for that or punished for that or helped to change for that. And it was a physical yes and no kind of thing. Nowadays, with psychology, with sociology, when we know about people's proclivities, we know about how we interact about things, how things affect us. I was watching one of the YouTube things on World War II, and they were talking about people, getting shell shock. They didn't know what PTSD was. They just shell shock. They were just tired of fighting. And they didn't understand that killing a whole bunch of people can destroy your psyche, or being shot at too many times can destroy your psyche. And I know that my dad was a corpsman in the Navy on a hospital ship in the Pacific during World War II. He signed up for the Marines. At the end of being commissioned as a Marine, they said, "Oh, we're building 5 new hospital ships, and you're going to be on one of them. Marines don't do medicine." So they made my dad a pharmacist mate on one of the ships, and he was picking up his friends from boot camp who were Marines being killed at Iwo Jima and all of the other islands that were being invaded. And, to talk to my dad about what any of that was like, he didn't. He really didn't talk about, all of the people who were friends or acquaintances or comrades in arms, with him in boot camp who they buried at sea or whatever. He told some of the good stuff. My dad's ship rescued the people from the Indianapolis who brought over the second atomic bomb, and then they got sunk, and half of them got eaten by sharks. And my dad's ship, the Tranquility, was the one that picked up the survivors. And so he talked about that. Talked about going to Tokyo Bay for the signing of the peace of the surrender. And they had picked up General Wainwright from the Philippines and brought him on their ship to Tokyo. So those are the kind of nice stuff Dad talked about. The rest of that stuff he didn't want to know, and he didn't want to bother us with, the gruesome stuff, until maybe the last couple of years of his life. And then he felt free to talk about it. And the movie that Clint Eastwood made about Iwo Jima was the thing that after he saw that, and then he decided he wanted to become a Marine again. And it's like, Dad, you're in Navy for 40 years. You're not becoming a Marine again. And we're not moving you to a military cemetery. You're being buried next to Mom, and you already made that promise. And we're not changing your burial. And we had, the usual ceremonies and stuff, taps and, the firing of salutes and things. But we're not going to, and we were not going to list in his obituary that he was a Marine. He was a Marine for 9 months or 6 months, and then he was in the Navy for 4 years, and then he was always a Navy person until he finally became a Marine again in his own mind. It's like, okay, you were both, be good. But the point of that is that as we learn how to deal with people's difficulties, then sin changes. People, everything is not just black and white. And people face, circumstances. Somebody might be in a bad marriage. And at first you were allowed to separate with the instruction of a priest or whatever, but not to get a divorce and obviously not to remarry. In our country, we tried to be better than other countries, us and Ireland and a few other places, where if you got a divorce, not getting married again, just got a divorce, you were excommunicated from the church. We lifted that in the 1960s here. Ireland finally lifted that in the 1990s. And it was really strange because people would go and get an annulment in an Irish tribunal that the marriage was invalid, but they couldn't go to an Irish court and get a divorce. So they had to go to England to get the divorce that ratified their annulment. Crazy stuff. We're getting beyond that. And we begin to realize that not all marriages are due to last, especially now that life is not ending at 40. The average life was 40. The average marriage was about 20 until the kids grew older and mother or father sometimes died in childbirth or just died of whatever. But when the average life expectancy is only about 40, then it's totally different than so many people whose marriages fall apart when they become empty nesters, or when they both retire. And it's gone from taking care of the kids and having time for each other every once in a while to having no kids, but at least we only see each other 6 or 7 hours because we're at work, to all of a sudden the 24/7, and we find out that we don't have anything in common anymore, and we don't want to work at it, and we're driving each other nuts. And a lot of people, strangely in their 60s and 70s, instead of finding a new way, just end up splitting up. And we don't see, that necessarily is something that people have to be held to. So when we take that new attitude, then we have 3 ways of celebrating the sacrament. Okay? First way, we only celebrate that in rare occasions, is general absolution. General absolution is kind of reserved for crisis time. People going days before D-Day, for example, before they boarded their ship, the priest would give general absolution to everybody who was going because half of them were going to die. And there was no time to hear all of those confessions, so that would happen. We could do general absolution at times like during COVID, where people can't really get together in a physical place and you don't have the opportunity, or during times like the plagues or the pestilence, or a hurricane, tornadoes, all those kind of things. If I'm on a plane and my plane's going down, I give general absolution to everybody on the plane next to me before we crash. So it's kind of reserved for those special times. It was used at times as a way to get people back to the sacrament, and then and now it's kind of reserved again for special circumstances. The other 2 ways that we have, individual confession with individual absolution, going to confession in a confessional, or we here in the back of the church on weekdays or whatever. You can make an appointment, see me in my office, and we can forgive you for any sins you've committed. That's confession. That's individual confession of sin and individual absolution. Or we can do that in a penance service. And the first time your children will receive the sacrament is if you choose, in May. That'll be their time to receive the sacrament. And what we're doing now is we're creating other times during the course of the year where there are family-appropriate services. You know, the thing that not only I've noticed over the years, and I've always tried to address it, and we've finally started to do that now here in this parish. I've only been here, it hasn't been 3 years since I've been here. It takes me a while to get some of this stuff going. But in every parish I've been at, we started doing penance services for children so that they get appropriate times where they can come to the sacrament, where they feel comfortable about it. You know, if you send a kid into the confessional by themselves, it's not the same if you're sitting in the bench and I'm hearing your child's confession on the chair and all of a sudden he or she breaks up and starts crying and starts being afraid, or you can help them. And because they're out in the public, you know, and know that I'm being nice to everybody who came before them, I'll be nice to them as well. That helps them to have a healthy sense about that sacrament and have a little bit of a chance when I'm hearing confessions at a penance service to hear them individually, but to say all the prayers and stuff beforehand. So, you know, the act of contrition. We all say it together, so it's not that they have to read it right or say it right. We all know that it's their first penance if they come to a first penance service, or it's your 40th year since you've been to confession, if that's who you are. And I'm not saying good, bad, or indifferent, making judgments about that. You're losing opportunities. You know, we have to look at receiving the sacrament of penance appropriately by either seeing, and treating it like we do with doctors or dentists or anybody else that is a helping person, that we do a checkup, we do a physical. Yeah, I see my doctor 3 times a year. My physical is always the first one, January, February. I'll see him again this summer. He'll do blood work on me. I just went to see my dentist on Monday, and they were amazed that even with this arm not working, that I not only had no cavities, but I also didn't have much plaque or tartar in my mouth either. And it was like, how do you do that? And it's like, well, I have an electric toothbrush and I have a water pick, and they both work for my left hand. So, and I go to the dentist 3 times a year because I have a propensity to grow a whole lot of junk in my mouth. So I don't want to have any more crowns. Half of my mouth is artificial. There's one implant. There's about 12 or 13 crowns in there, and all the front teeth are real. So I don't want any of them replaced, and so I take care of them. Yeah. And, and because I just saw the dentist and he gave me floss, and that's no good because you need 2 hands to do floss. You need 1 hand for a water pick or 1 hand for my little toy things that I do with, I've got these mounted floss things you can put in between your teeth. Yeah. But that's the point of the sacrament of penance. It's to do the same kind of thing. When we're feeling bad about something in our lives, physically, we go to a doctor. When we need something better done, when we need to look better, we go to a clothing store, or we go to a hairdresser, or a hair salon, or whomever, to get ourselves looking better. Might go to a dermatologist because something is wrong. We know how to do that physically, and it's being able to do that spiritually. And so what I'm going to suggest to you is that for the next 3 or 4 years, while you kids are in 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, that at least once a year you come to one of the penance services that are there that fit their psyche much better than going to individual confession. You're welcome to come to individual confession. I don't throw kids out of that. but I also know that half those kids just aren't sure what they're doing. And so, I'll take the time to help them, but at the same time, at a penance service where we go over a little bit, where there's an active examination of conscience to look and to see, what their sins are and what they want to change, then that's a good thing. And that's one of the important things for you to do in the next month and a half before May 11th, if you're coming to that penance service. And while they're kids, to help them anytime they're coming, whether it's to confession on a Saturday or to a penance service in Advent or in Lent, one of those times of the year that we offer that sacrament, to help them to understand what their sin is, and what their sin isn't. And it, sometimes we just use the wrong words to describe. I use bad language. I offended somebody by using bad language. I called my mother or my father something really inappropriate, and really hurt them, and I got them really angry. I didn't get up the first time Mom or Dad called me to get up for school, get up for Mass, and they had to call me 3 or 4 times. And then they got really angry and they get really upset. The sin isn't necessarily that I hit the snooze button. I can do that. Every morning, my thing goes off at 7:10, and I'll hit the snooze button until 7:30. That's my magic time where I must get out of bed to grab my first cup of coffee before we begin morning prayer at 7:45, because that's my first unless I have the 6:30 Mass, then I have my alarm go off at 5:30. And I'm kind of cursing the person who made out the schedule and put me down for the 6:30 until I realize I make the schedule up. And I'm trying to be fair to everybody. None of us like to do the first Mass in the morning, but we will when we take our turns. And so, I had it Monday. There was none this morning. Gents has it on Saturday. I don't know. I think I might have it on Sunday morning, and I have it 6:30 on next Monday because I have a doctor's appointment at 8:30 and I have to be in Kenistone Hospital by then. So I have to get up. So or if I'm preaching at Masses, then I have to get up, even if And so what I'll do is, if a week I'm preaching, then I'll do that. We need to look at sin as something more about I'm disrupting. I need to change. I need to grow. I need to be better. What I'm doing is not the best. And some of the things that kids especially need to learn is with your help and support to do stuff. I can, or you can ask your kids to take out the garbage. And when they don't do it the second time that you ask, you can yell at them the third time. You can take away their smartphone or their computer or their game, or you can say, hey, let's go do this. And if it's like, you grab the garbage, I'll grab the door, let's go put it outside. And that it's our responsibility together. And after a while, they eventually learn. It was when I was in college, our director had this big thing about making your beds. And a lot of times we got up and we had class early in the morning, and during our first class, he would go around and put a little note so you didn't make your bed. And he would make it for you. So it's like, okay, the guy's nuts, his compulsion. My mom did that for years. I don't make my bed. My mom always made my bed. She always picked up my clothes. She even picked up the clothes that I would put out that I was going to wear for the day and throw that in the hamper if I wasn't careful. So I learned not to do that. But it was like, Mom has something to do, so you can do it. So then Dick Boucher, our our director, started charging us a quarter. We had a contingency fund for things we broke or whatever, and we had to put $25 down into the fund, and he would just steal a quarter from you every time he made your bed. And then he stopped making your bed when people would leave out little notes. It's like, I have to change my sheets. Would you change my sheets while you're making my bed? And he didn't think that was funny. I don't know why. You know, we one day had one of my classmates whose name was John. He got a note. John, you didn't make your bed, 25 cents. We took the note and put it on our assistant director's bed, which was not made, whose name is John. And they didn't think that was funny either. But, you know, sometimes you just have to have fun with those kind of things. But, you know, find solutions to the things that you want. And don't make demands that you do 10 things and that everything has to be perfect. You know, so it's like, let's go together and do this. You know, let's help. Can you help me do the dishes by drying them? You can do that to your husband or your wife who doesn't do any of that. Yeah. If I cook in the house, right now, especially with my arm, I do not load the dishwasher or unload it. Because doing one piece at a time with your left hand, I'll be dropping stuff all over the place. When I cook, I will spend 3 hours or so in the kitchen cooking, and then after I cook, the other 4 guys who live in the house with me will load the dishwasher and do the pots and pans, except my own personal pots and pans, which I will not let anybody touch because they scour them and ruin them and take all the coatings off of them. But, and again, I can yell and scream at them, or it's like, just leave me the pans. I'll do them myself. Yeah, and it's just easier than trying to, But it's trying to help people to change behaviors, not just to, respond to what we must do. It's not, have any of you watch those little cute kids who talk about mom and dad? Who's the best one in the family? Who do you go to when you need help or whatever? And if it's something bad, you go to dad because they don't complain. And if it's, who's the boss in the family? And one kid goes like, oh, my dad's the boss of the family. He makes all the decisions. But my mom's the neck, and she turns his head wherever it has to go. So she's really in charge. They're on YouTube or on Facebook Reels or one of those things. Some cute stuff that talk about life. So, what I'm going to ask you to do over the next 6 weeks or so is to sit down with your children, who are coming to the sacrament of penance, whether it's for the first time or for the third time or whenever they're coming, and just help them and say, okay, what are the 2 or 3 things that you can do better? And how can I help you? And also, what are the things I can do better? I don't know how many parents will say things like, I have no patience, and I get angry so easily, I gossip about people, or, all those kinds of things. And, especially if you get angry at your kids all the time, or if you're screaming at your kids, if you're lashing out at them, if you're downplaying them, if you're abusive of them in whatever way, how do you fix that? And the way in which you fix it is you work at the same problem, and you get rid of the problem. The bed thing was really cute. When I was in high school, I was in the seminary, and we had a big, huge dorm, and there was a big bell that rang at 7:10 or something, magic time, and the director would come through the dorm, just walk through, and if you were still in your bed, we just grab your sheets and just pull them. And now you had to get up because you had no sheets on you, and you had to remake your whole bed, so you're losing 5 or 10 minutes, so you had to jump up and catch him before he drags your sheets halfway down the end of the aisle, and you have to find them and stuff. Creative guy. We weren't thrilled with how he did that, but it was effective. And he didn't have to yell at us. He didn't have to tell us off. He just simply, in silence, just grabbed your sheets and walked them away with your blanket and your pillow and anything else that was loose, and it was spread all over the dorm, and you had to go find it. You can do those kind of creative things with your children, you know. But, you know, again, the important thing is use the sacrament, use it well. It's there to help your children and yourself to grow. And just want to give you an example. We had some confusion about the sacrament of penance we just celebrated for families last week. And parents were saying, do I have to go? And we said, no, you don't have to go. But you have to teach your children about the sacrament. And you have to teach them by what you say and by what you do. And I just put, you know, by word and example in what the parents' responsibility was. You know, we're not going to stop your kids from making their first communion or anything else, but we're saying you have this responsibility, and how are you living it out? And about 85% of the mothers and fathers who were at that service went to confession that night. Yeah. And I'm not going to tell you what they did or how long it's been, and it wasn't a week, you know, for a whole lot of them. You know, and to be able to show to your children that this is something of value because I do it. You know, we do that with bad things. You know, who taught me how to smoke? You know, my dad did, because when I was a kid, he smoked. And when I was 16, I started to smoke. And when I was 17, he gave up smoking. I didn't follow his example, you know, until about 8 years later. You know, so, you know, that kind of stuff of giving good example or giving bad example. You know, when I was in England, we had a girls' Catholic school right up the street, teenagers. It was a comprehensive high school, basically, junior high school combined. And the kids would come in and they'd go into the drugstore or the newsagents and buy cigarettes, and their language would be really appropriate. And somebody went up to one of the nuns and says, "Oh, sister, is that what you teach them in third grade, you know, in sixth grade?" And she goes, "No, we wait till seventh grade to teach them about that." You know? And it's like, no, I think that's what their parents might have taught them. You know, yeah. My grandfather taught me how to swear in French, because we used to play cards with him, and when he got angry, he said all these choice words. And my mom said, "I'm not going to tell you what they mean, and you're never going to use those." You know, I found out eventually what they meant, and bet your life I didn't use those in front of my mother or anybody else. You know, so I know how to swear in French. I know how to swear in Spanish. I know how to swear in English and in American and in sign language, but I don't use any of those words. You know, but you have to be careful so that you're not using them wrongly, because when you mispronounce something, sometimes it's cute and it's clean. Other times it's not clean. You know, it's especially when you don't know the vocabulary for a different place or what the meaning was. You know, and you think you know what a word means, and all of a sudden it doesn't mean the same thing in the same place. I had my housekeeper came up. She says, "Oh, you have a wonderful collection of jumpers in your closet." And I'm like, I'm not into cross-dressing, so what is that they have a collection of? In England, a jumper is a pullover sweater. Yeah. So if it's a pullover, it's a jumper. If it's got buttons, it's a cardigan. And you have to learn how to do that. Or we had pen pals writing back and forth between classes in England and in the United States, because they'd been in school in the United States before I went to England. And the kids in England were all collecting rubbers. And they said, "Oh, we collect," they come in different sizes and shapes and different colors. And Sally calls me up and she goes, "What's a rubber?" And it's like, it's an eraser. Yeah. And so it's like, make sure your kids know that that's what they're collecting, and they're not collecting condoms. Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, you know, just to to know, and to then, again, to follow up. So if the kid's going to come and say, this is what I want to do differently, have the structure to do that. So have the structure to say, okay, your room's a total mess. Let's pick up the toys. Your room's a total mess. Let's pick up the clothes. And it's like, it's laundry day, so bring your clothes to the washing machine. Let's go. You didn't want to put them in the hamper? Fine. Go right to the washing machine, and they're there. And that makes a big difference, in terms of how we teach people, so that it's not the negative stuff. It's the let's do it right stuff. Let's change the bad behavior stuff. And half of that's going to work, half of it's not, and you just figure out how you deal with it as you go along. And please, please, please never use the old God doesn't like people who steal cookies. God punishes people who do bad things. No, he does not. You punish yourself. If you rob a bank, God is not going to arrest you. Police might, the FBI might, the bank guard might, the car that's driving down the street and not noticing you running out in front of them might, but it's not God who's going to punish you for robbing a bank. Now, if you rob a bank, shoot some people, and ruin your life and don't get caught, you might end up ruining your life forever. Because sometimes the sins that we do continue to affect us. And that's another big thing that's really important about sin is who we were. Whether it was who we were 10 minutes ago, or who we were these past couple of weeks, or for us as adults, what we did when we were teenagers, or the really bad decisions that we made a while back, and we still haven't forgiven ourselves for them. That's a lot of craziness. To feel that I did this. I was unfaithful. I had an abortion. I made a bad decision. I was in a terrible accident, and somebody got killed in it. And the court said it wasn't really my fault. It was, it really was truly an accident. You did everything that you should have done. We can still live with that kind of guilt. Make sure that we're not putting guilt trips on 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds. There's no place for that. The other big thing, and if you want to embarrass yourself, let your kids do this. I have kids who come up and say, Father, I don't go to church on Sundays. And my answer to that is, that's not your sin. Do you have a way to get here? And I had some little kid, 7-year-old, said, well, I don't have my license yet. I said, oh, okay. Well, if you come to church, who brings you? I said, well, my mom and dad do. And it's fine. Tell them that's their sin. If your child doesn't go to church on Sundays, unless they live across the street or in the neighborhood and can walk here safely, that's your sin. So don't let them understand that that's theirs when it's your responsibility. It's the same thing if you don't give them the right medicine, if you don't give them the right food, if you don't get them to do the right exercises, etc. If they don't go to the dentist, whose sin is that? That's yours. If they don't go to the doctors or to the hospital with a broken shoulder or a broken arm or a broken leg, if they don't take care of themselves, whose responsibility is that? That's yours. When they're 6 or 7. So don't dump that kind of stuff onto them. And it's a great opportunity for you to be able to say, I haven't done what I'm supposed to do. Just, make that a chance to grow. Not a negative thing, not, oh, I got one over you now. I know the dirt in your family. They knew that already, but it's just the kind of thing to use the sacrament appropriately, okay? And to use it. And any questions, thoughts, comments on any of that? Okay? Is that all making sense? This is not a guilt trip. I am not trying to say you're the most terrible parents in the world if you don't bring your children to confession every once in a while. If you don't bring them to confession for years, something is wrong. You're failing. If you don't bring them to Mass, if you don't bring them back to the sacraments, why is it that every year we have about 150 kids who receive their first communion, and then by September we have about 85 kids in church on a regular basis? It's amazing how 60 or 70 families can move away to another church or to another city or to another country, right after they make their first communion. We know that's not the case, but, and again, it's not my place either to do anything more than to say, you're invited, you're here, you should be responsible. In my gentle way of saying to somebody, there's one guy who came up to me. I was in a restaurant walking in, and Nick stopped me and says, "Hey, Father Jim, I saw you at Christmas. I'll see you next Christmas." And my answer to that was, ain't good enough. How about if it was like this time, Easter was coming. It's like, Nick, how about Easter? Why don't you pop in, and catch us on Easter? And just left it at that, And Easter Sunday morning, I finished the last Mass of the morning, and a little knock on the door as I was changing my vestments, and there was Nick. He said, "Hey, I'm here. I heard you." And within 3 years, he started to come back to Mass regularly. No excuses. And I didn't nag him for 3 years. I just basically hit that one time. Or he ran a sports bar. They had really good food. And so I would occasionally go there to eat supper and stuff. And, we'd give him a hard time, about things. And, I get a free meal, and he get a free plug in my bulletin about, this great sports bar called Hail Mary, that great bar for Catholics to go to. And on that note, we'll see you on, May 11th is the service, and the little get-together before that is May 6th? 8th? What's the date? Huh? The 6th, okay, yeah. I find out when I'm doing stuff. I look at the schedules, and it's like, it's there the week ahead of time, so I know. And every morning, I pop into Tina's office to say, okay, what's on my schedule today? What did I miss already? Because it's already 9 o'clock, or today I didn't miss anything. So it's pretty good. Yesterday, I missed the fact that my class was supposed to start at 7, and I started at 7:15 because Tina put 7:15 on my schedule, and I just don't do what she tells me to do all the time. Well, thank you. We'll see you on the 11th at least, and I'll try to make the 6th to spend a little time we're having supper or something together and stuff. And who knows, if my arm is better be, if it's out of the sling and moving around and I can do stuff with it, I might actually, I haven't baked in, I baked for the Lego, the family game night. I did some, yeah, those are easy to make because I can do that one-handed. I made some pies, and you lay out puff pastry, you shove it in the oven, you get somebody else to pull it out of the oven because they can only use one hand, and then I make the filling and stuff, and I can stir a pot with one hand, and then I got other suckers to put it on top of stuff and to carve it up with it. So it works. Anyway, thank you all, and then we'll see you next year as we prepare your children for their first communion.